Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our webinar tonight, Impaired Driving Healing After the Death of a Child. Our webinar tonight is brought to you by the Compassionate Friends and Open to Hope, and our special guest tonight is Carl McDonald, the National Law Enforcement Initiatives Manager for MAD.
Hey, thanks, Alan. Well, Carl, welcome to this webinar. We're excited to have you on. Why don't we start with you telling us your story?
I am a career law enforcement officer who is currently retired. In 1998, I was a division supervisor for the Wyoming State Patrol in Rawlins, Wyoming. In 1998, on January 1, my daughter was killed in a drunk driving collision. The offender in the crash, unfortunately, was my ex-wife. We were divorced because of a drinking issue in the marriage, and I was concerned about the safety of my daughter. In the process of a divorce, I had sought custody successfully of my daughter, but my ex-wife still had visitation rights. Long story short, on January 1st, during a holiday visit, she was driving with my daughter in the car, and rear-ended a tractor trailer on Interstate 80 with a very high blood alcohol content of 0.22, and my daughter was killed at the scene of that crash. My daughter was placed in the front seat of the car as a passenger and did not survive the crash. She was 5 years old. The death of a child, and then this other dynamic that I was experiencing, and that those, unfortunately, that too often experience this as parents, in terms of a preventable criminal act, is has its own special set of cruelties. In general, the death of a child in the life of a parent is an unnatural event, and it defies all of our thinking. Healthy parenthood is anchored in the idea that we will outlive our children, and because of that, it's conditional. We would fearlessly protect our children given the choice, assuming that they will outlive us, and part of our mission is to make sure that that takes place. Even to the point of sacrifice. You could ask an awful lot of parents and get the same answer, that they would trade places with their children, given the chance that the child would survive. As in the death of any child, all kinds of things start taking place. Helplessness rules. Realization is slow in coming. There's all kinds of things that are going on, certainly that I experienced and that all parents experience. Denial can be a very strong part of this. 2 years, I would not close the front drapes of my picture window at my house. Now that window faced out onto the street. In my case, when I last saw my daughter, she was walking, I was looking at her through that window when she walked down the sidewalk and got into the vehicle when my ex-wife came to pick her up. And I had this belief that I could not close that curtain, for instance, because I wanted to see her come back up that same sidewalk.
What happened to your ex-wife?
The penalties for this are state specific, obviously, and it is culturally specific. So, and a short version of that, what I'm trying to say is it's difficult to get a large prison sentence for someone who's killed another person in certain areas of the country, and Wyoming is certainly one of those. I had to have a conversation with my family and explain that my ex-wife, she did survive the crash, that she may end up with 5 years of probation. However, I had a very aggressive prosecutor working as hard as he could, and he went after very, very hard, recommended 12 to 18 years prison time on a guilty plea. The judge sentenced her for 2 to 5 years, and she ultimately did 18 months in prison and then was released. We talk in media circles all the time about closure, and boy, I particularly dislike that word. I think it's a media term. Closure means when the case is all settled and someone is sentenced, that the families really don't get closure. I think the media does. They get to fold their tripods, put their cameras away, and leave. I knew by then that it was time for me to, having accomplished the duty to see this put through the criminal court system, to then take a break and work on me. It was a very trying experience, extremely. They talk about the case in terms of the perpetrator's name. They don't talk about the case in terms of the victim's name. In my situation, my daughter's name is Carly, and it was not the Carly McDonald case or the Carly McDonald verdict. It was the Susan McDonald case or the Susan McDonald verdict, because she was the perpetrator. And so even my daughter's name is left out of it in that sense. Again, to my experience, one of the things that I had to endure was a preliminary hearing, which is this is a case where blood was drawn. My ex-wife admitted to drinking. Blood was drawn. Tests were done. The result was back, and she was being charged with the murder of a person under the influence of alcohol. It was very clear cut, and I had to endure a preliminary hearing where all the evidence was going to come out in terms of autopsy, photographs, and endure this fairly early on in the process, so that a very low-level court judge could review this and say there's probable cause to send her to the higher court on this felony charge. One of the problems that comes up, and we certainly deal with that a lot at Mothers Against Drunk Driving, is this. First off, you have this terrible loss of a child, and then you're thrust into the criminal justice system, which is a foreign environment for anyone who's unfamiliar with it. And then once that maze is negotiated in the criminal justice system, many people are left with enduring the ordeal in civil court process as well, which can be drawn out for many years. And each hearing and deposition and other event that takes place involving that just draws it out more and more. Through this whole process, I think it's very commonly stated by people who have lost a child, under any circumstances, that once they have gone through this crucible, that they are not the same person that they were going in. That certainly was true in my case. And just to summarize, the reason why I put that bullet in there is it even goes so far in some as personality changes, certain dramatic lifestyle changes. And in the strongest terms, I would certainly urge to live one's life with the anger and betrayal of an offender as an overpowering emotion day to day. Is it's not going to hurt the offender at all. Surviving is not the easiest thing, and we all have to find and pick our way through. First, I would say, please don't give up. If there's one place in the world that I thought I could follow my daughter in death, would be right there.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so don't give up. Number one, early on, don't give up. Breathing.
Carl, I just want to say to people, wanting to join your child is normal. Feeling that you would like, to join them where they are, but having a plan or, having the idea that you're going to do something about it is not normal.
Breathing is an achievement. Getting up in the morning and standing on your feet. is a victory.
Mm-hmm.
And putting one foot in front of the other and just starting to walk. You need to just work on that as this is a victory. This is me, and I'm doing this. After moving through the significant portion of the criminal process, I knew that I wasn't healthy, and I had to take a very good pause and just lean into my grief. Once my duties were over with, the funeral, the eulogy, the criminal, the this, the that, and all these things that came up, once all those hurdles were overcome, then it was time for me. And I took some time to get away and lean into my grief. In my mind, it is a pay me now or pay me later proposition, because if we don't take time for that, then we will pay a cost for that. It has to be done. It's good hard work, and that's a lot of what the Compassionate Friends does. It is a lot of what Open to Hope is all about. And this is the hard work. This is where the big hard work takes place. Whether it's research and reading, going to therapy, going to groups and getting together with groups like Compassionate Friends to find that you are, number one, you are not alone, but you'll see your future there, where people have survived this, and they're several years down the road, and they can help folks in this walk.
That brings me back to thinking about, we've done a couple of radio shows with Candy Leitner, who started Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and she started it right away after her daughter died. And she said that she was with the Congress and advocating and lobbying for 3 years, and she said after 3 years I'd had to go home and do the work of grief. I hadn't done it. Alan, I wondered if you could log in on this, because you're head of Compassionate Friends, about the chapters and what you see.
We have a lot of families, obviously, who've had death from an impaired driver. And what I like about this webinar tonight, Carl, is there are some specific and unique things about this type of loss. And I think the Compassionate Friends is great for working on your grief. And what I love about what you're doing in MAD is that you're also helping these families with negotiating the criminal justice system and in the court system. And I think what you said was validation here. This last thing that you were talking about is when you're involved in this type of a loss, you may not be able to focus on your grief like others may be able to do when you're caught up in the justice system and in the court system. And I think that's what our people are asking here. And that's okay. I think is what you're saying is that you may have to work on the justice side of things a little bit before you can focus on your grief. But at some point you do have to give it that attention. And I think a lot of people hearing that is a validation for them, because they feel so caught up in the legal system and making sure that, that part gets taken care of.
I always had to keep myself in pretty good physical shape. And so I was a runner. And I shortly, as soon as I could, shortly after my daughter's death, is I tried to run again. And I had a lot of tries and failures, because that takes a functioning heart and lungs and all these things. And all the parts weren't working early on. It was kind of humorous, because I would start up a hill or something, and I get hit by what we famously know as a grief spasm, and it just stopped me in my tracks. But I kept at it, and I was persistent, and that was very, very helpful for me. So physical exercise, not everybody's a runner, but some sort of exercise, walking, making sure that you're checking the sunsets, anything outside of yourself as helps. And I found great relief and as have many, in journaling and writing down thoughts.
Another question from Terry. She said, Carl, are you still angry at your ex-wife? And if not,
No,
what do you do to get past the anger?
very good question. No, I'm not, and I needed to dump that quick. The discussion I had with myself, my internal conversation, went something along the lines of this. It was, this is your life, this is not her life, and you have to separate the two immediately. There is no room in your life for her, not after what's happened, not ever again, and because of what has happened, this is not going to be easy, but separate that as quickly as I could. And I was successful at that I did a lot of research on forgiveness. My pastor tends to call that the F word. I think that's a great description because it's such a difficult concept. In my case, it was internal, not external. I would never have contacted my ex-wife and said, I forgive you.
Right.
That's different than anger.
We've got a question here. This woman says, Carl, do you have more children? She said, I have a problem. I have 3 children, and I have to connect with my ex-husband because of the other 2 children, and I hate him. Apparently, he was one driving.
Oh my goodness, that's going to take sacrifice for the benefit of those other children, and put them first. That's my best advice.
Sacrifice. That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got one more question, and this is just, wow, I'm sitting here reading it twice. It's from Jeff, and I don't know what your comment might be on it, Carl, because I absolutely don't know what to say. The question is, my son Jeff was killed by a drunk driver. The drunk driver was my son Jeff. Jeff was the driver. Jeff died, and this person feels like the son was the perpetrator and the victim.
We encounter this a lot at Mothers Against Drunk Driving. As a matter of fact, we have a very closely defined, because of necessity, description of what we term as a victim. That this gentleman or woman, I didn't quite catch that, but this person who lost her son because he was driving drunk, that person qualifies for and gets services from our organization, and we would reach out to them. Now, that's great. Lot of people in that position are very understandably reluctant to, because their son or daughter was the perpetrator of their own death, and that doesn't make any difference, because we were in the aftermath of the crash, and that person that wrote to you is certainly in the aftermath of that crash and deserves services. One of the things that as things went from this unique position that I was in, and then the development of the public service announcement, and then the development of the documentary, they're just as an odd piece of timing in the world of traffic safety. The Centers for Disease Control came out with a result of a study in 2001 that looked at child deaths in drunk driving collisions, and shockingly found that in the last 11 years, when the study spanned 11 years, and in those 11 years of this country, 66% of the children killed in crashes were killed in cars that were driven by the drunk driver. And that these people were supposed to be the caretaker of that child. It was startling. I think everybody in this culture of it'll never happen to me also thinks when it comes to drunk driving, that's that other guy out there. And everybody thinks that if a child is killed, then it must have been because somebody came across the center line, the driver plowed into a family, and a child was killed. Instead, it was the person at fault was behind the steering wheel of the car.
Wow.
That the child was riding in the overwhelming number of cases. The things that my organization is currently urging these family law courts is to engage in doing this solemn approach by saying, okay, if there's concern about the safety of children in this divorce or pending divorce or separation, when both parents are going to be transporting children, then both of you will have an ignition interlock device to blow first, and then the car makes a decision whether or not you're safe to drive. We do have a bunch of materials for folks that are concerned about these kinds of issues. We have a whole packet that we send them that includes the original child endangerment report and materials not only directed at the parents, the adults, but also at the children for steps that they can take to ensure their own safety if they feel that they're riding with a driver who might be impaired. Urging them, for instance, to get into the back seat of the car if they're not already in the back seat. And by now, I hope that we know that our children need to be in the back seat. To get into the middle, use safety restraints, be quiet, make sure there's nothing above them and behind them that could, if there's sudden braking involved or front-end collision, that could become a missile and injure them, those kinds of things. We operate a 24-hour helpline, and we receive, in this particular arena, we receive calls from victims of all kinds. And in this particular arena, like I say, we have prepared materials for folks. But we run a helpline at the number of 877 MAD HELP, and that's MAD with 2 D's. HELP.
One of the things that I hear from you is that you have gone out and become proactive. You've gotten involved. You've reached out. You've moved out. And I think with Compassionate Friends, I've seen it. People become chapter leaders. They join chapters. I think you have some chapters. People volunteer. I'd like to ask you, if I'm watching this, and yeah, I've been involved in a crash, and the trial is over and everything. Can I volunteer at MAD?
Oh, absolutely. We have. That's exactly how our organization started, and that's how we survive. That's our base. That's our core, and that's how why we serve and how we serve. Right there, as people come to us, maybe we've helped them, maybe we haven't, but we have a whole track for volunteers involved with.
Carl, thank you so much for all that you do and for all that you give, all the families that you help, and thanks for informing our audience a little bit more and getting them acquainted with MAD. We just appreciate it. We thank all of you for joining us for our webinar tonight. Once again, this is brought to you by Open to Hope and the Compassionate Friends, and tonight we honor the organization MAD. And Dr. Gloria, Dr. Heidi, always a pleasure with you. Carl, once again, thank you. And we thank everybody for joining us.